Hello everyone and good evening. I'm Don Arleth and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw here on TVP World. Where we are together, Russia will not pass. That's the signal coming from Warsaw today, where Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with the Polish Prime Minister and President. There was a lot of support for Kyiv, but also were talks about reconciling the past historical differences between the two countries and looking towards the future. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first up, let's take a look at the headlines. Russia planned terror attacks in the skies. Prime Minister Tusk said that Poland was also targeted. The U.S. wants to limit many EU countries, including Poland, from acquiring the latest generation AI chips. And Brussels prepares another sanctions package. This list includes aluminum and liquefied natural gas from Russia. We need to convince our partners in NATO to jointly guarantee the security of Ukraine after hostilities end, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said in Warsaw today during a state visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy arrived in Warsaw this morning and held meetings with both Prime Minister Tusk and President Andrzej Duda. Marek Steele followed the events in Warsaw and brings us this report.
The leaders of Poland and Ukraine discussed a topic that's expected to top the agenda as soon as Donald Trump takes office: the prospect of an end to the war in Ukraine.
In 5 days, President Trump's inauguration will take place in the U.S. We expect active collaborative work in the spirit of the peace through strength approach.
Poland's Prime Minister has proposed that security guarantees which Ukraine has been asking for be provided by NATO.
In the event of an end to hostilities, the question of NATO security guarantees for Ukraine remains an open and urgent issue. This is about real security guarantees, ones that will be respected, that everyone in the world, including Russia, will be afraid to cross, and for that we need all allies.
According to Tusk, the best guarantee would be Ukraine's membership in NATO, but this is not possible due to doubts that some member states have. One issue that has been a bone of contention between Warsaw and Kyiv for years, the Volhynia massacre during World War II, resurfaced in the Polish presidential campaign last week. As a leading conservative candidate backed by Law and Justice said he didn't see a future for Ukraine in the EU and NATO without a reckoning for the massacre. Prime Minister Donald Tusk has since announced that Poland had received a green light from Kyiv for exhumations of the Polish victims of the massacre to begin.
We cannot in any way allow, whether it's in Poland or in Europe, for the Russian narrative and the attempts to blackmail Ukraine to be a method for any talks or negotiations on the future of the European Ukraine.
This sensitive topic was also discussed with President Duda, with whom Volodymyr Zelenskyy met Wednesday afternoon.
Work is now underway with the ruling coalition's working team and the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture on the subject of these historical search and exhumation issues. There are 20 requests submitted by the Polish side. I hope that these requests will be systematically dealt with.
It's very important that we will not have any questions about history. Of course, we have a lot of different issues which are very important for societies, but for me it's very important to stay together in unity.
Talks in Warsaw also touched the issue of Ukraine's EU accession process. Zelenskyy expressed confidence that a breakthrough in Ukraine's EU accession process will occur this year, during Poland's presidency of the Council of the EU.
Moscow continues plotting attacks behind the scenes as a White House probe revealed a Russian plot to send explosive devices to the United States on board airplanes. This follows a wave of incidents at European airports which saw packages spontaneously combust, and the Polish Prime Minister revealed today that Poland was also a target. Franciszek Pilis has more.
The investigation, reported by the New York Times, revealed that the plan was to find out how to bypass security at borders and send explosive packages to American soil. The packages consisted of consumer goods, like electric massagers, that would catch fire once unloaded. While the main concern is regarding cargo planes, sometimes passenger planes also take smaller packages if extra space allows. These acts of Russian air terror aimed at countries like Poland and the US, as well as airlines all over the world, were confirmed by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk at a joint press conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Some of the sabotage acts and diversion prep were of incredibly striking nature. I cannot go into detail, but I can confirm that our concerns were justified, as Russia planned acts of air terror not only against Poland, but also airlines all over the world.
With less than 1 week left in office, US President Biden's team has been trying to send a clear message to Russian President Putin to stop these activities. The effects of their efforts, however, are largely unknown.
Thank you, Mr. President and Madam Vice President.
Lithuania fears Russian sabotage and is therefore bolstering security of the energy bridge with Poland, which up until now was guarded by a private company. The authorities in Vilnius emphasize that they are even ready for extreme scenarios. Our correspondent in Lithuania, Yevgeny Rusakov, has this report.
The Lithuanian government has approved a draft urgent resolution submitted by the Ministry of the Interior proposing to prematurely start the protection of the Litpol link switchyard and the transformer substation. The Public Security Service started protecting these critical infrastructure objects from today. The changes are made in view of the planned disconnection of the Baltic states from the Russian-controlled electricity system and the connection to the continental European grids, which is scheduled for 8th of February 2025. A step of crucial importance for the energy security and independence of Lithuania and the entire Baltic region. According to Minister of the Interior Vladislav Kondratovich, the decision to prematurely start the protection of the Litpol link facilities is directly related to Lithuania's national security interests. The security of this infrastructure is essential to ensure vital state functions and energy stability. The tense security situation in the region and incidents such as the disconnection of communication and electricity cables in the Baltic Sea clearly demonstrate the urgent need for additional protection measures. The decision to prematurely increase security was discussed at an interinstitutional meeting organized by the National Crisis Management Center, where the appropriateness of the proposal was agreed. Straight from Vilnius, Yevgeny Rusakov for TVP World.
During a meeting in Brussels at NATO headquarters, Secretary General Mark Rutte sounded the alarm about imminent threats posed to the alliance. The defense and security bloc should switch its thinking in terms of war, he said. This comes as European Commission Budget Commissioner Piotr Serafin encouraged NATO countries to spend more on defense. Sasha Farbach has more in his report.
Ominous and alarming damage to critical undersea infrastructure cables in the Baltic Sea, to continued military aggression in Ukraine. These are dark days for NATO. At a meeting of top military brass in Brussels, the alliance's Secretary General Mark Rutte expressed his concern that member states are falling behind in tackling the dangers that surround them.
Our future security is at stake. Russia's war against Ukraine rages on. Russian hostile actions against our own countries are accelerating, with cyber attacks, assassination attempts, acts of sabotage and more. We used to call this hybrid, but these are destabilization actions and campaigns. Russia is hard at work to try to weaken our democracies and chip away at our freedom.
As the head of the alliance makes his plea for allies to do more, the same calls have also come from across the Atlantic by incoming President Donald Trump. Currently, not all 32 members are adhering to the 2% of GDP guidelines set by NATO. Poland is leading the ranking with 4%, closely followed by Estonia, the US, and Latvia. However, there is still a significant gap. Some major economies like Italy and Spain still fall far short of the minimum required. The new resident of the Oval Office has made it clear that he seeks to double the current spending target, perhaps at the next NATO summit in June.
Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%.
The latest demands by Donald Trump have not found support by major allies like Germany. Recently in Kyiv, Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, although supportive of the alliance and assisting Ukraine, has cast doubt on the new threshold for the transatlantic alliance.
As things stand today, 5% would mean that Germany would have to spend something over 40 or around 40% of the entire federal budget on defense. This is hardly conceivable.
Despite the reluctance of Berlin, Warsaw will heed the call, encouraging greater spending for all NATO members. Poland has doubled down on its military since the invasion of Ukraine and is now well on its way to fielding one of the most modern armed forces in Europe.
If there's one thing we need to agree with President Trump on, it's that no one will fix our security problem for us. If all the European countries take their NATO commitment seriously, America will be satisfied to continue working with us, seeing that we're a very serious partner. President Trump told me as much in our many conversations years ago.
Brussels is also expected to step up, with its new defense commissioner saying the EU needs to spend 500 billion euros on defense capabilities over the next 10 years. And although the new EU budget has not yet been announced, the EU budget commissioner, Piotr Serafin, has also joined the chorus, advocating that raising defense investment by 1% will already raise significant resources for NATO allies.
NATO members have an obligation to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Not every member state fulfills this obligation. If all member states were to implement this commitment in Europe, we would have an additional 50 billion euro to spend on defense. If this 2% was increased to 3%, it would mean an additional 170 billion euro annually.
Despite the urgency, however, NATO allies remain disunited. And with an unpredictable new president in Washington and a Brussels that is slow to act, European defense will remain in choppy waters.
Now to the Middle East. Israel and Hamas agreed to a Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal. For more information, we now move to our correspondent, Diana Skaya in Tel Aviv. Good evening, Diana. So is this the end of the war in Gaza? What do we know at this time?
Well done with some difficult words you said there. We're hoping that it's the end of the war, but what we do know is that it's the closest that we've ever been in over a year since November 2023 between Israel and Hamas to finally reach a ceasefire deal. If this really goes through, I mean, the Israeli cabinet is to meet tomorrow at 11 a.m. local time to discuss the final details. Some clauses that are still hanging really includes about the thousands of Israel vetting the over 1,000 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners that are set to be released, that are serving life sentences, which is a difficult move for Israel to do. However, they are going to most likely sign on it. That Donald Trump was the first one to announce this. And surprisingly, if it does go through, of course, Sunday, we would see the first 3 Israeli hostages being released in exchange for approximately 50 Palestinian prisoners to be what Israel wants is to be sent abroad and not to send back to the West Bank or to the Gaza completely. Now, we also know that in this deal, what's going to happen is that the IDF will temporarily begin withdrawing troops from the Philadelphia corridor that borders with Egypt. And of course, Israel does believe that, of course, in the first phase, 33 hostages are set to come home. Let's be reminded that there is also a Polish Israeli citizen that is among those hostages. Him and his wife were taken captive on the 7th of October. The wife was released in November. He is still believed to be alive and believed to be in Gaza, hoping. His son actually contacted me today, just to talk to me and telling me that he is the last Polish citizen who is still in Gaza. We have yet to see if this deal will go through. But I mean, there is people honking on the streets here a while back. People are really ready for this. Also, the Israeli president met with also the Red Cross, and they're talking about they're preparing hospitals, they're preparing psychologists, really saying that this time around it's going to look different for the hostages coming out as they did back in November 2023 in the first round of the deal. So really, Don, it looks like there are going to be changes. And of course, Donald Trump is definitely taking credit for that, although President Joe Biden did admit that the ceasefire is definitely taking place. Don?
All right, well, let's cross our fingers that everything works out and those hostages safely return home. Diana Skaya reporting for us from Tel Aviv. Thank you for the update. A report by Poland's National Public Prosecutors Office has uncovered irregularities in cases investigated under the previous Law and Justice government, which was in power from 2015 to 2023. The team audited proceedings from the time when Zbigniew Ziobro, the former Minister of Justice, served as Attorney General. Alex Sumlinsky has more.
The partial audit reviewed 200 out of 600 cases from 2016 to 2023 and identified irregularities in 163 out of 200 investigations reviewed, including politically sensitive investigations. Only 37 cases were deemed free of serious issues.
The most important from the perspective of ordinary citizen, I believe, is the number of cases which were dismissed without any justification. There were mostly the cases against the members of Law and Justice and other persons from ruling camp of United Right that time.
Justice Minister Adam Bodnar, who also serves as Prosecutor General, said on social media that the audit reveals a shocking picture of misconduct under former officials.
The report shows a shocking picture of the prosecutor's office, which under Zbigniew Ziobro and Bogdan Świeczkowski did not primarily serve citizens or the state, but primarily one political party. Values such as law and justice were completely subordinated to political struggle and building a sense of impunity.
Among the cases that were looked into by the prosecutor's office is the Two Towers affair, involving a Law and Justice's real estate development project in Warsaw. The case had to do with development plans of the Law and Justice party-linked company Srebrna and allegations of fraud by Jarosław Kaczyński. The accusations were made by Austrian businessman Gerald Bergfellner, who was questioned several times in the case, including once in Austria. Jarosław Kaczyński was not questioned once. The prosecutor's office refused to open investigation. The second case is the investigation of a car accident in which former Prime Minister Beata Szydło was injured. The prosecutor's office and the police immediately charged the young driver of the vehicle. The auditors also scrutinized the capture of the Constitutional Court, granting subsidies to organizations close to the former government and hate speech cases.
In Wrocław, during the far-right march, there was a lot of hate speech against LGBT people, against Muslims. The prosecutors took their work firstly seriously, and they found two persons which were responsible for that. But later, there was a visible signal from the National Prosecutor's Office, and the case was dismissed.
400 more cases are being investigated. According to the head of the Justice Ministry, the results of the audit are expected to contribute to strengthening the prosecution and eliminating dysfunction. The full report is expected to be published in late February.
Experts and politicians in Poland are outraged that the country has not been included on the list of America's closest allies when it comes to sharing the latest AI technology. The Polish government, which earlier this week unveiled an ambitious plan for the development of the tech, protested the move, claiming it doesn't make sense. Jan Kennedy has more.
Access to these little metal plates defines a country's ability to develop cutting-edge technology, and Poland's capabilities in this area have just been curtailed. Warsaw has found itself outside the club of countries that enjoy unlimited access to the cutting-edge US-made NVIDIA chips that are critical for AI development. This has generated a lot of backlash, with the Polish embassy in Washington demanding an explanation from American authorities. Poland's Deputy Minister of Digital Affairs, Dariusz Standerski, told TVP World that the ministry is struggling to understand the reasoning behind the US's move.
It's typical final days of every administration where all delayed decision, prepared or not, are published. However, we really do not see the interest, not even for the world and for the global chain of AI, but we cannot even see the interest for the US.
Washington has divided the world into three categories. Tier 1, or the US's 18 key allies, are countries with robust technology protection regimes. They've been granted unlimited access to advanced chips. Tier 2, which includes Poland along with most of Africa, will be allowed to import 50,000 chips, with the possibility of doubling that figure. Countries in the third tier, which Washington considers hostile, will be completely cut off from deliveries.
Whether or not this means that we want to develop our own data, like AI data centers locally, of course that's going to affect us, because 50,000 GPUs is nothing. Elon Musk's XAI, they built their Colossus data center, and they purchased over 100,000 H200 GPUs just for one company.
Washington's announcement comes at an unfortunate time, just as Warsaw is ramping up its AI efforts. This week, the Polish government unveiled an AI fund intended to jumpstart innovation in both the economy and national defense, touting investments worth hundreds of millions of euros. The AI fund could disburse roughly 220 million euros. These resources will be directed towards startups, SMEs and major industrial players, all under the banner of building a Polish AI factory. How Poland will now reconcile these ambitious plans with restricted access to state-of-the-art chips remains an open question. However, Minister Standerski says that the restrictions imposed by the US won't hamper Poland's plans to double AI computing resources in 2025. He's also hopeful that the incoming President Donald Trump will scrap these restrictions.
According to media reports, the European Commission is mulling a proposal to ban aluminum imports as well as liquefied natural gas from Russia. While officials in Brussels have kept silent on the potential sanctions, the Kremlin, however, has already sharply criticized the move. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins reports from Brussels.
According to international media reports, the European Commission is mulling a proposal to ban the imports of liquefied natural gas as well as aluminium from Russia. If supported, the ban would come into effect from February at the Foreign Affairs Council meeting here in Brussels. Now, currently, roughly 15% of piped Russian gas and LNG comprises EU's total energy market, with roughly 130 metric tons of aluminium exported out of Russia from January until October last year. And when pressed at the midday briefing, the European Commission spokesperson said that he would defer the matter to the European Council. Here is what he had to say.
Decisions for sanctions are made by unanimity by our member states at the Council, and that's where your question should be directed.
The Kremlin said that if the EU carried these proposals, it could destabilise an already fragile market. But if the European Council did enact this suggestion, it would come into force from February, with other rounds of sanctions previously targeting Russia's shadow fleet, as well as military companies and officials operating in North Korea and China. My name is Angela Skujins, reporting from Brussels for TVP World.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy paid a visit to Warsaw on Wednesday and held meetings with the Polish Prime Minister and President. To no surprise, Poland will continue on its path of unconditional support for Ukraine in its war with Russia. But is there more that Poland can do? Now joining me to discuss is former foreign policy advisor to the chairman of the Ukrainian Parliament, Vera Konstantinova. Hello and good evening. Thank you very much for joining me on World News Tonight.
Good evening, my pleasure.
Now, enduring support for Ukraine, of course, that's not any surprise coming out of Poland, but is there more you think that Poland can do? And were there any new takeaways from your perspective that were discussed during these press conferences here in Warsaw today?
I would say in Kyiv there are a huge covering in media of this visit of President Zelenskyy to Warsaw, and I would say there are at least three main aspects that experts as well as media paid attention to. First of all, it's about a historical aspect of our relationship, and it's great news already came regarding the steps that both sides had already made in order to commemorate and to have a normal relationship in terms of volume strategy. And the second point, I would say that energy security also the most one of the most important issues on the agenda, as well as defense and further support of Ukraine from Polish side. Of course, yes, indeed, our Polish colleagues, friends and partners had made significant attempts in order to support Ukrainians and Ukrainian state in terms of counteracting Russian aggression, Russian full-scale invasion. So whether we can imagine or can request for more, of course, currently we are all under the threat of Russian imperialism. That's why currently it's not about requesting for more, it's regarding the common understanding of the threat and, of course, common contribution to the joint security of both our distinguished nations.
I'd like to ask about security guarantees because that was discussed, especially with Prime Minister Donald Tusk. He was, well, somewhat reluctant to push for the implementation of such a solution of sending, say, European troops, Polish troops to Ukraine if indeed a ceasefire or a peace agreement is met. But if indeed this comes to fruition, how is this being looked upon in Ukraine? Would NATO troops be the only guarantor of a ceasefire agreement that would be acceptable?
I believe that it's a discussion for a couple of hours, because in terms of Ukrainian understanding and I would say strategic mindset, the only guarantee for Ukraine, for our long-standing and long-lasting peace and security, it would be a membership in NATO. And I'm so grateful to our Polish colleagues that there are a significant support in this regards to our membership, both in the EU as well as NATO. But of course, Ukrainians are not only, we are not only the recipients of the security aid, but we also can be a donor for long-standing security for all the European continent. I mean that our unique experience in practical terms in counteracting and fighting with Russians could be an added value to the alliance. And in terms of political declarations, we feel the significant support from the Polish side. Of course, there are several countries in the European Union as well as NATO that are a little bit skeptical, but I believe that our Polish colleagues also had made some kind of steps in order to explain why Ukraine is an added value, not only for Central European architecture, security architecture, but also for the transatlantic community. And we will see, I hope, after the inauguration of President-elected Mr. Trump, we would see some kind of modalities in order to promote the idea that Ukraine should be in NATO. And of course, in terms of not only in political domain, but also in terms of military, we are experienced nation, experienced army right now, and the most experienced army in the European continent. But of course, currently, there are a lot of discussions regarding the possible modalities of so-called ceasefire, because in terms of Ukrainians, I believe from our perspective, there are, we had several agreements with Russians before 2022, and all of them was violated. And not only in terms of, so-called Minsk Accords, but also we did have several agreements, and Russia had recognized our territorial integrity and our borders. They violated these agreements. So where is the guarantees for this? I would say that the most important part of this discussion, not about the guarantees for in terms of NATO membership, but the guarantees in whole. How can Russians be a partner in terms of some kind of negotiations?
Right, which will eagerly be waited upon, shall we get to that point. Now, I don't mean to put the cart before the horse, but reconstruction was also touched upon in the press conferences today, especially with Prime Minister Donald Tusk. It's been floated that Poland will play a vital role in this process. In your opinion, should Poland play a bigger role than, say, others, due to its huge support from the very beginning of the war that it has often offered and given to Ukraine?
I would say that in terms of, if to remember first month of aggression, I remembered several markets where I had seen a lot of Polish products that helped us to survive during the first months of our resilience. So I believe that Polish Polish companies could play a much bigger role, of course. And of course, we believe that in terms of reconstruction and rebuilding, Polish companies could play a significant role in terms of restoration of normal life for those deoccupied territories of Ukraine. And there are a lot of there are huge humanitarian aid, and not only for Ukrainians who are under the temporary protection in Poland, but also for Ukrainians that stayed and returned to the already occupied territories. So I believe that in terms of financial and conceptual, I would say, support and aid, I believe we have a huge opportunities and in order to include and to have some kind of Polish companies in our energy security domain, or for example in social domain.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you very much for this conversation. Former Foreign Policy Advisor to the Chairman of the Ukrainian Parliament, Vera Konstantinova. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.